If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today I'm joined by Dr. Stuart Phillips, a professor of kinesiology at McMaster University and one of the world's leading experts in muscle and protein metabolism. In this episode, we dive into the crucial role of muscle in aging well and explore how strength training and smart protein intake can drastically improve your health span. If you've ever wondered how to build a stronger, healthier body as you age, this conversation's for you. Let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about muscle, protein, and training. And we've got one of the top people in the world here to talk about that in Professor Stu Phillips. Dr. Phillips, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, real pleasure to have you on. And so I want to dive right in. Why is this such an important topic for people to pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably everybody can, push their finger on muscle and say, well, if we don't have muscle, we can't move around. And one of the key and critical areas, particularly in aging, is that, we need to have muscle to be mobile. And it's becoming increasingly recognized that decline in mobility as we age is going to result in a pretty poor quality of life and a host of other diseases. But I think there is an appreciated role of muscle, and be taking a page out of my mentor, Bob Wolf's playbook. He wrote a paper a long time ago, The Underappreciated Role of Muscle, in that it's an organ that is the leading site of disposal of blood glucose, so it protects you against type 2 diabetes. It's a big contributor to your resting metabolic rate, so buffers you against weight gain. And it's also a major site of lipid oxidation, so it controls triglycerides and your balance of things like cholesterol even. So big role in lots of other things other than mobility. Not to say mobility is unimportant, but it does a lot of other things too.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that underappreciation point here. I think it's only very recently that its role in longevity, in quality of life is really being recognized. And I noticed it in sport initially as the number one mechanism to prevent injury. We found consistently, if you were weak, you were hurt.
Yeah.
And, when I was with the Maple Leafs, every single year with the intake testing we would do, groin injuries being the big injury in hockey, any player who was in the bottom 30 percentile for groin strength ended up coming into camp 3 days in with some sort of reactive tendinopathy, some sort of soreness in the groin. And so that was the biggest clue to us that this was going to be the lever we could pull to prevent injury, and ended up going 3.5 years without having an injury. We didn't have a single non-contact injury. Coming out into the longevity space now, I'm out of sport, I hear over and over again, and I had a chat with an 80-year-old gentleman yesterday, I've lifted some weights, but, not trying to bulk up. Yeah. Almost like that's a bad thing. It's this association with injury. It's like, well, actually, we should probably be trying to bulk up now.
Yeah.
And I think it feeds into so many areas, whether it's bone density and just your ability to get up off the ground, all these areas that I think are largely misunderstood when it comes to muscle and strength.
Yeah, I mean, I think your comment on, professional sports is interesting because, I mean, there you've skimmed the cream off. I mean, so it's not the mere mortals, not people definitely like me. I won't speak for you, but I was a very mediocre athlete. I tried really hard, and that was probably why I got to do anything that I got to be able to do. But when you talk about the upper tiers, pro sports becomes, because of the pressure, it's like a crucible for,
Mhm.
rise to the top low. So it's cream within cream.
Yeah.
And it definitely highlights, because of the extreme pressures of performance and everything else that goes along with it, obviously the money side, notwithstanding, as you say, is that things that are sort of the weak link are exposed really, really quickly. And all that aging is that, but drawn out over a period of
Yeah.
years. And, the wear and tear that takes place that you saw within the confines of a camp is now over decades, right? And I mean, right off the bat, and I think it's important to say is that, and I wish I could say differently, there are a lot of people talking about aging reversal, and nobody's doing it, right? Like, just so, just to be clear, I wish I wouldn't be coming to you from my basement. I'd be, we'd be on a beach, sipping a Mai Tai and be like, hey, Jeremy, what are you doing? Because we've reversed aging. But there's a way to slow aging and to age well,
Yes.
or age a lot better than this sort of scenario of rapid declining function. Oh, we lose this, and gradually we lose our ability to do the simplest task, rising from a chair, and then we're dependent on other people.
Yeah. And I often joke that, exactly to your point, working in professional sport it's like mouse studies, right? We get to compress the lifespan into 3 years. We essentially do that with pro athletes, right? We just see how quickly the human system can adapt, because we got to test it every single day. We're testing it to its absolute maximum. And stuff breaks. And so we have to figure out, okay, did this work? And we know next week if it worked or not. So we can iterate and change. And it's why it's transferred so well into longevity. Because what we found, you think about the old mantra in sport, the number one predictor of injury is previous injury. Well, the reason for that is poor rehab. And so now we translate that into longevity, and we see, okay, this person had a shoulder surgery, right? They were 30, 40, didn't really rehab it. Now at 60, that's where they got pain.
I can't get my hand above him. You're like, oh,
exactly. But don't know it until somebody asks them to try it.
It's an interesting comment as well, as you said, about loss of function, and again, over time. I mean, over time, everything's sort of breaking down. It's like the house that looked great, and then 30 years, it's starting to. And I mean, as much as we might try and repair it, and we can, obviously, is that in some houses look better after 60 years than others. Is that what's the key? Because we get these super agers, these people who they what's the key about what they did? And clearly, I think genetics plays a role, and there's no question about that. But as the tenet goes, is genetics sort of loads the gun and lifestyle fires it, so to speak, and genetics is the keyboard, and you can play chopsticks or you can play a symphony, whatever your analogy. But I think athletes are somebody who, for a short period of time, they're all playing a symphony, but then there's some that play it well, and some that maybe are good chopsticks, and maybe, that's all they ever are, fair enough.
And there's some people that just try really hard to play.
And that was me. That was, clink, clink. And I took piano lessons for years, and I still remember the day when I did the test. You turn around, the instructor would play the music, and I couldn't read a note, like years. My mom was pretty disappointed, but I was like, okay, that's not for me. And that describes my athletic career, actually.
Well, and so I think that's a really good way to move into how we learn to play the symphony, right? There's so much noise out there in both exercise and in nutrition. And what I want today's episode to be about is not the dogma, black and white, you must do this. And on the other end of the spectrum, it depends, it could be this, it could be that. For me, nutrition and exercise breaks down into sort of tactics and strategies, right? Our tactics are our paleo diet, our low carb, name the fad diet that we've got. Our strategies are energy balance, protein, fiber for me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's again very general.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on simplifying this into principles that people can take away that they can apply to their life that are very practical and very achievable?
Yeah, one of the things that in a previous life, I used to coach. Rugby was the main sport for me. I used to work with individual athletes, but talking to rugby players about how to, and these were mostly sort of varsity, university level uh, rugby players, but some who went on to national team and a few who went on to pro careers, how to shop at the grocery store. And
Right.
I still think that this is something that where people, could stand to learn the lesson is, and most grocery stores are laid out, are the worldwide almost the same. You
Yeah.
go up the first aisle and it's produce, so it's fruits and vegetables, and you need to fill a good portion of your shopping cart with stuff that's there, and then you walk across the back and it's generally, there's meat and then there's dairy, and you need to get some meat, make them lean if you can, cuts, avoid maybe red meat, definitely cut down on the processed red meat, and then you move over to dairy, and no issues with milk. Stay away from butter for now, but eggs, although they're not dairy, I get it, but they're usually in that area, are fine. They're off the dirty list. Get some fermented dairy products, so yogurt or yogurt, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're from. Kefir is, and a lot of people, kefir, and I'm like, I don't know, like I pour it in the shake in the morning. I find it's awesome, but it's so damn good for you. And then walking down the other side, it's generally where the grains are. And if there are grains to be chosen, make them whole grains and not whole wheat, because that's different, but whole grain.
Hmm.
And if we did that a lot more than spending time in the middle aisles, where, don't get me wrong, we need some tins of vegetables, we need some
Yeah.
soup, and that's where the coffee is. And, can't imagine a
Yeah.
world without coffee, right? So
Yeah.
you got to
Cheers.
go into those. Absolutely. You got to go into those aisles. But all of the value added products, and for a large part, there are thousands of new products every year, and that's where they appear. And they're processed foods for the most part. They're contrived, they're added, together. And, I think it's beginning to become pretty clear right now that those foods are the ones we should avoid. So,
Yeah.
whole foods and, cooking, and I hate to say that, but we've lost the art of cooking a little bit,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit of sitting around with some friends, a partner, and enjoying a meal, which I think, is definitely, as I've gotten older, I've begun to appreciate, because I've lost some friends now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
being with people, is such a key part, right? And it's so much about nutrition, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what about food, and
Yeah.
dare I say, a good glass of wine or something like that.
Yeah.
Although, that's been blown open these days as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I love that distinction, food and nutrition.
yeah,
I think early in my career, I got very, very caught up in nutrition
yeah,
and very dogmatic, do this, especially being around athletes a lot. And it's
yeah,
all geared
yeah,
towards performing
yeah,
around that food. So it's
yeah,
seen very much as a tool.
yeah,
Again, in that longevity space and the value of connection, probably being more profound than basically any other intervention we can put in place in terms of extending your lifespan,
yeah,
and in your quality of life. I think the connection around food itself and the process of cooking and sitting and eating, I just don't think can be overstated here. But one thing I'd like to get into now, that we're gonna talk about muscle.
sure.
We've highlighted how important it is, why it's important. What's the process of building muscle? What does that look like? 'Cause going from, let's say, our steak and coming into our body and incorporating into the muscles at a high level.
Yeah. Protein is made up of individual building blocks that we call amino acids. You can think of them as bricks. Even Lego bricks works, and each one's a different sort of either shape or color or something like that. And there are 20 of them. 9 of those bricks we need to come from our diet. We can't make them, but the other 11 of the 20 bricks, as long as we have the 9, we can make those 11. And so we call the 9 that we need essential, or sometimes indispensable amino acids, and we call the other ones non-essential. So when we're ingesting protein, what we do is we pull apart all of the bricks of the proteins that we eat, we absorb the bricks, and then we put them into circulation, and our body makes them back into long chains, and these chains fold. And I think the main distinction, and sort of come back to the nutrition aspect, is that we take in carbohydrates and fats. And I think everybody sort of, so rice, pasta, bread, that sort of thing, fats, oils, and fats in even in animal products and plant products, they're fuel. Like we have a very small requirement for some fat. Theoretically, although I'm not sure I'd enjoy it, we can live without carbohydrate. But we need protein because our skin, our bones, and everybody goes, oh, bones are calcium. I'm like, but actually 40% of your bones composition is protein. If it were just calcium, it's like a stick of chalk. They would break all the time.
Right.
And our muscle obviously is sort of like the reservoir of protein. And the way I like to think about muscle, it's as if it's a storage site of amino acids that if your body's really stressed, you break down muscle. Like you give up muscle because it's not an essential tissue compared to immune proteins, blood proteins, and other proteins, which are far more important that your body will need to make. So an aging concept or a concept in aging, I should say, is that muscle is like a functional reservoir and a buffer against insults that happen a little bit more frequently with age. It could be a sickness, it could be hospitalization. And the more muscle you have, the more you're buffered against those things. And the more muscle you have, going into aging, you tend to do better.
Yeah. And talk to me about protein requirements. When we hear about, recommended daily allowances,
Yeah.
we've got, okay, you should eat this much. We hear recommendations that for years have been associated with bodybuilding that I think people associate with an unhealthy way of living. Where should we fall on that spectrum of protein intake?
Okay. So my writer statement before we get started is we study muscle in my lab. I've been doing it now. I've been at McMaster for 28 years now. It's amazing to look back and like I can still remember the beginning, so to speak. And because we study muscle, you obligatorily have to study protein because that's the substrate that is muscles built of it and everything. When I first started, I was looking at younger, healthier people, more like the athletes, maybe not as good, but, we were trying to put muscle on these folks. And we did a lot of experiments and we learned a lot about, how muscle is regulated. And I thought for a long time is that protein was very important. Like, here was lifting weights and protein was right beside it. And, career goes on. I get older. Research, as I like to say, becomes me search because I'm like, why can't I do that anymore? And, about 10 years ago, I took over running a center at McMaster called PACE, the Physical Activity Center of Excellence. And, 500 community members coming in, exercising, average age of about 72. And I'm like, what's happening with these people? So we began to study aging. And then all of a sudden you realize is that actually when you put all the data together is that of the two things is that like lifting weights is so much more important than protein. And I don't want to minimize protein, but so that's my rider before we get started.
Right.
So I think we overcooked the protein message when I was in the earlier parts of my career. Yeah. And I know everybody goes, oh, Phillips has changed his mind. And I'm like, well,
isn't that science?
That is science, right? And as my dad, who was a Londoner, would say, he goes like, "What good is a mind unless you can change it?" Right? Like he was a tradesman, And he was so smart. Some of the things he said now, I find myself, I'm like, geez, like my dad was pretty smart, you know?
Right.
So then I find myself saying them back to my kids, and I'm like, I am my father, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so let's say is that the recommended dietary allowance is zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So I'll do the quick translation. It's about 0.35 grams of protein per pound of body weight. And everybody wants to know, is that ideal body? It's like, no, that's actual body weight. So scale weight. We think it should be higher. We think because as you age, you're not as efficient at using protein. You need to support muscle. You should eat more protein. We think it could be as high as double that. So 0.7 grams of protein per pound or 1.6 grams per kilo. I like for older people, and we have, during March, which is Nutrition Month in PACE, we tell people like it's okay to eat eggs because, that generation grew up thinking that eggs were going to kill you. And I'm like, they're off the dirt list for now.
Yeah.
Because cholesterol dietary wise is not that big a deal. Good source of protein, generally, although not as much lately, pretty cheap, great sources of nutrients, but, things like Greek style yogurt and everything else, these are great breakfast foods. And so when we talk to people, we like to say, we'd like you to be about 1.2, do the math and, see where you are. Most women hit around 1. Most of the men are around 1.2. I would love for them to be closer to say 1.3, 1.4, but I realize that maybe there's a pragmatic reason. It's economics. They can't afford certain things, or they choose not to, or their appetite is lower, or they just tend to gravitate towards foods that aren't protein based. So, but the 0.8, I think is too low, and for a number of reasons, not the least of which, if you eat closer to that, as you age, you do lose muscle a little bit faster.
Yeah. And I think I see that as well we have a lot of people that come to us going into 60s. They've got an osteoporosis diagnosis. They are chronically under-muscled. And when you break down their diet, first of all, a lot of our women that come to us have been conditioned to eat and train to be thin, right?
Yeah.
They're not. They don't want to bulk up.
Yeah.
So protein is sort of seen as a bad thing.
Yeah.
That chronic underfueling, low protein intake, low calorie intake, chronic calorie deficit, I think has led to this state whereby now, as you're going into these years where now you're already in a deficit and it's going to be harder and harder to build. I think that's such an important message.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario to me. And, you say that don't bulk up. So we've got 3 trials currently ongoing in older men and women. We've got one trial actually that's exclusively older women. And the bulk up message it's one that comes back. Well, I say, you're going to lift some weights. I don't want to bulk up. And I said, like hand on my heart, 30 years doing this, and you could probably say the same. Lots of females, lots of lifting programs have never seen a woman bulk up yet.
Right.
And they say, and I'm like, no. Like when you look at some of these pictures, you're not going to look like that, but you will be stronger.
Yeah.
You will be more functional. Muscle pulls on a tendon that pulls on a bone. That's what bone's like. Bone density improves as a result, or it goes down, slower than it would normally. Mm-hmm. All of these things are going to make you into, somebody who moves better, somebody who's more functional. And you'll find, the phrase is the whole world seems lighter. Everything, when you pick up groceries, all of a sudden you're like, huh. And you walk in from the car, just little things. And people, I think, particularly women, there is a bit of an epiphany. They've never done weightlifting, structured weightlifting before. And all of a sudden they're like, and what they'll tell you, I didn't have a role model when I was in my 20s for a woman who lifted weights.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Jane Fonda and aerobics. And as you said, and I guess skinny would be the right word. We would say lean now, but
Yeah.
it's this, lean, thin physique. And
Mm.
that leads itself, as you say, under muscled, poor bone density, fallen fracture. I have
Yeah.
a colleague who's a neuromuscular physician, and he calls these people tea and toasters. And I think it's
Hmm.
because of their diet. But yeah, it's a recipe for maybe not a great quality of life.
Yeah. And so if we were to walk people through what a day's protein intake should look like practically,
Mm,
outside of grams of protein, because I think again, what is 20 grams of protein?
sure.
So what should each meal look like throughout the day then from a muscle building standpoint?
Right. So breakfast or whenever you break your fast, some people it's always got to be oh 06 or 0700, but I've got three sons and usually sort of like 10:30, 11 is
Yeah.
when they break their fast. But that's a meal that most particularly older people under consume protein. And so we try and get, everybody's favorite breakfast food, whatever it is. And so we take off the, eggs are going to kill you hat. And we say, two eggs, you've got about 15 grams of protein there, half a cup of Greek style yogurt, and you're already up to over 20 grams of protein. No problem at all. People say they feel full. They feel that there's a good level of satiety. They're sated. That mid-morning snack, or that sometimes people talk about the crash, they feel tired. They don't tend to experience that because of the satiety effect. I don't think it's really an energy crisis. It's more like actually I'm pretty hungry, right?
Yeah.
So you know, whole grains are great sources of protein. There's lots of now plant-derived protein sort of sources that I think have no issue at all. A lot of people like smoothies, and so if they need to, I talk about maybe putting a scoop of protein powder in the
Hmm.
smoothie. They always want to know which one, and I'm like, one that tastes good, that doesn't have too much other stuff in it. And they go, what about the one at Costco? And I'm like, perfect. Like, I have no
Great.
issues with that at all. You don't need fancy grass fed if you want to. That's cool. It just costs a lot more money. And I think lunchtime is another meal. It's sort of like the soup and salad type thing. And I'm like, okay, but a serve of protein that goes in there. Maybe it's a small serving of chicken breast. Maybe it's a piece of fish or something like that. And then dinner time probably that's the one meal where there's a big serve of protein or bigger. And I'm like, actually, if you do the other two meals like the way I've described, that actually doesn't have to be as big a piece of protein. And so, when you sort of add it up across the day, then I do find that people are surprised with just a little bit of sort of how they change their eating, how quickly they get to, the types of intakes. It's at least 1.2 and probably higher grams per kilo. So around sort of about 0.45, zero point 0.5 grams per pound. And you can get there pretty quickly if you just change. Breakfast is the key meal, I think. If you just got to change your mindset about that.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And it's super practical and really gives people a visual for what it looks like versus a get 20 grams, you know, 4 or 5 times a day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and people always, do protein scoops, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's fine,
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I don't, I have protein powder in my kitchen, right? I got three
Yeah.
sons, so they mainstream this stuff.
Right.
But my point is to them is you can do all of this with food, right?
Yeah.
They're just really keen on. It's like I don't have time, Dad. So it's like the blender gets a hard workout in the morning with
Yeah.
everybody's protein shake. So and that's
Yeah.
fine, but it's still real ingredients except for the one scoop of protein powder.
Yeah. Yeah. And then as we move into that, then you mentioned it earlier. The important part is then we have to give that protein something to do.
Yeah.
And for me, as you said, training, lifting weights is where that protein now we create a demand for it to be stored, to build muscle mass, to build bone mass.
Mhm.
where do we start with our training then?
Yeah, that's the perspective that the way you talk about that is actually, it's interesting. I'm not sure too many people think of it that way, but that's certainly the way I think about it too. Um, Everybody, I think, is of the belief that protein feeds muscle and only muscle. And in fact, only about a quarter of the protein that you eat goes to sort of feeding muscle. Yes, we have a lot of muscle, but the proteins in muscle, we call it turnover. They're made and degraded relatively slowly, but there are other proteins, they're much smaller in terms of quantity, but they turn over really fast. And those are the proteins that are, we need to take care of as well. So there are a lot of blood proteins, there are immune proteins, there's skin proteins, there's within your gastrointestinal tract is made up of protein. So, from that standpoint, the reason why muscle is so important is if you do give muscle a stimulus like exercise, particularly loading exercise, then that increases the rate at which muscles are making new proteins. And so it becomes a draw, if you like, for the protein that's consumed. And every other process becomes much more efficient.
Yeah.
So it's as if the whole system is sort of tightened up, and tighter systems that are turning things over. It's almost as if you can imagine a car engine that gets stripped down and rebuilt like on a regular basis, and that thing works like crazy, as opposed to one that it's sort of like, we'll just turn this over quickly, that's kind of rusty, wow, that's going to wait a little bit. So the whole system, if you like, with a demand for amino acids in the muscle area, everything works better. That's not probably the simplest way to say it.
Yeah, and so we've seen, especially in the female exercise world, we've got a few people that are really proliferating the importance of lifting heavy
Mm,
for women's health. But I zoom that out to everybody, as we age.
yeah, yeah.
Where should our intensity be in lifting weights? And I'll give a little caveat here. I think that message of lifting heavy is missing a piece. Lifting heavy relative to what is sort of how I look at it, and I'd love your
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, part of the answer to this question, I rely on data of, prevalence of practice. So if we look at surveys of people who are, let's say 50 plus, and we say, how many days a week do you hit the guidelines of 150 minutes and 2 days a week of strengthening activities? And 70 to 80% of women in particular don't do any form of resistance exercise, like at all. They don't lift weights at all. And so I'm thinking, well, there's a market. We need to change their mind. We need to get them to do something. And there is a sort of a rule, particularly with physiology and exercise, that we know, and physical activity, that if you take somebody from doing nothing to something, that's when the big reduction in risk happens. And so, and like a really sharp reduction. So, once you've done something, it's sort of incrementally the curve begins to flatten out. Or if you look at it in terms of risk, or benefit, it's like steep benefit. Oh, not bad. More and more and more and more. And then it begins to plateau off. So the people who are doing, 300 minutes a week, which is not me, awesome. Look, good for you. Or lifting 5 days a week, I'm like, okay, also good for you. You're not like everybody else. Clearly,
Right.
you're a little different. So I always sort of, start with that. Like, so if you're not lifting, start lifting. And then the message is, what and how much do we lift? It's tempting to sort of grade everything according to percent of one repetition max. And this would be, your pro sports example is perfect. You come in and you put something on the bar and it's like, how much can I lift one time?
Yeah.
And that's the 1 RM. That's the how much
Yeah.
you bench, how much you squat, how much et cetera. If we back that off 20%, this 80% load is generally considered the heavy end of the spectrum. And it's a load that most people can lift, depending on whichever lift you're doing, somewhere between 6 to 12 times before they reach failure. So you're pushing the bar, and you need somebody to either push help you with the bar, or it's going to come crashing down on it. But if you're on a machine, you're putting and you can't do it, so the weight comes down. Same thing over your head. Same thing if you were squatting off the floor, pushing it with your legs. It doesn't matter. And that's cool. Like if you want to lift like that and you enjoy lifting like that or whatever, like, two thumbs up. Like I'm never going to tell somebody to stop doing that. I do think that there's room for something that's a little more practical, particularly with the rest of the population.
Mhm.
And that is, when we look and grade people's effort. And so that
Mhm.
last repetition, that one
Yeah.
where we're,
Yeah.
I don't need that all the time, but that's like 10 out of 10 on an effort scale.
Yeah.
And the effort scale, that's red, but 9 out of 10 and 8 out of 10, they're orange.
Yeah.
And it's like, you've got one repetition left, but you can do it. And you go,
Yeah.
I've got what we call a repetition in reserve. I got a little bit
Yes.
of gas left in the tank, but
Yeah.
I'm going to rack the weight because I don't have a spotter. And Phillips has just told me we probably don't need to go there.
Yeah.
And when we grade those sorts of efforts down to even doing as many as 15 to 20 repetitions, and I get it. A lot of people go, who wants to do that? And I'm like, actually, there's quite a few people who are
Yeah.
kind of good with that. I begin to say, so long as you finish sort of in that, maybe not even orange, because the next level down, the 7 is a yellow, and then we've got 6, which is green, 5 is blue, this sort of thing. If you're in the yellow to orange range on a fairly regular basis, you are squeezing a lot of benefit out of the whole system. So the rep range thing it's all good. Like I get 1 RM percentage and all this sort of stuff, but I think there's a degree of flexibility that can come with talking to regular people about how to do this, and it's an effort-driven paradigm.
Yeah. And what I love about that, Stu, is that it does make heavy relative to what you're capable of. And I think to your point, I see both ends of the spectrum. Women being advised, okay, wear a 6 pound weight vest when you
Yeah,
walk.
yeah,
Okay, if you previously haven't walked with 6 pounds, that's going to be helpful.
sure,
People who have that just doing yoga or just doing Pilates,
yeah,
great. When you start, that's going to be beneficial, but you're going to adapt to that quite quick.
right,
And that effort level at that intensity, at that weight, is going to start reducing.
right,
And so we need further stimulus. This is where heavy for me comes in, is you take a step up,
yeah, yeah,
because your rep 1 shouldn't look like your rep 12. And
no,
that's the guideline. Not that it's a specific weight, a specific percentage. It's for you. Was that difficult? And
right.
the
Relative to
over,
what you can do. Yeah, no, no,
yeah,
no. And so
yes,
the concept, we're I think, to give it a name is progression, right? And
right,
it's sort of like day one, that 5 pound weight or whatever over your head, you're like, oh, geez, this is hard. And
yeah,
then, you've done it for 10 weeks and that 5 pound weight is like, oh, this is easy. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
well, maybe there's a 7.5 pound weight. And you're like, oh, this
right,
is kind of hard again. And I'm like, oh, that's good. And
right,
maybe there's, you get to the 10 pound weight, and the 10 pound weight is actually, it's always hard. Like you couldn't do the 12 pound weight because maybe your
yeah,
shoulder hurts, or you just find it too much. And so you stick with the 10. But if you keep exercising with the 5, you're not really challenging yourself. You're like,
yeah,
oh, 35 repetitions and I'm still at 4 out of 10.
yes,
It's
yes,
not a big challenge, right? So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's where we see these men and women coming to us into their 60s, 70s, 80s, who have thought they were doing the right thing, right? Well, I
yeah,
do yoga, I do Pilates, but they've got the osteoporosis diagnosis, and when we do a DEXA, they're severely under-muscled. And it's
yeah,
because they've never progressed beyond body weight. And so adding that load in, I think that's the important principle. It's got to stay difficult. And that's how we keep going. And I look at the relative intensities of 2 of the 80-year-old women that I work with. We've got Jill over here, who has built up, and she's now deadlifting 50% of her body weight
yeah. Awesome.
at about 10 to 12 reps. She's doing great.
Yeah.
We've got Carolyn, who's doing body weight squats because
Yeah.
it's the first time she's
Yeah.
ever lifted weights, and she can just about do 10 reps, right? And so what's heavy is incredibly different for the two of them.
Right.
And what was heavy at the start for Jill is not even close now. She doesn't even rate it. So I think we must talk about not just heavy, and I heard the other recommendation, start jump training.
Yeah.
Well, you don't just start jump training. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If
You're like, oh, excellent. I hope somebody's doing it safely with you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What's the progression to go from starting
Yeah.
through heavyweight to plyometric training? Like these are
Right.
very, very specific training protocols
Right.
with
Right.
increased risk of injury that goes
Yes.
exponentially up. And number
Yes.
one, don't get hurt.
Yes.
Why we're doing a lot of this is
Yeah.
don't get hurt. We chose
It's actually
vitality.
to avoid that, right? Yeah. Yeah. No. It's interesting to hear you say that, because lots of people, I myself and a young researcher in the UK, Ashley Gukowski, have written a foreword to a whole issue in a journal talking about power training for older people. And as soon as people hear that, they go, oh, like I could never do power training like Olympic lifts. And I'm like, oh, hold on. Olympic lifts are one thing. Power training is totally different, but it is moving with intent, velocity to try and do something quickly. But the ethos of everything that we've written is it has to be progressive, and
Correct.
it's not something that we start from day one. And I do want to circle back to a thing that you brought up about Pilates, yoga, weighted vests. Let's be clear: find forms of exercise,
Yeah.
challenge the heart, challenge the lungs, make you feel good. But the progression of the weight is your own body weight. That you'll never the weighted vest as well. I'm walking with more, and I'm like, that's awesome. Like, you weigh 140 pounds, and now you weigh 144 or 45 pounds because of the weighted vest. Like, as a percentage of your body weight, that's a thin slice, and it's not going to make you stronger. It's not going to improve your bone density. It will increase your energy expenditure. And, but the promises and the claims on the internet are like, this will change, and they talk about bone density. And that's a lie. There are no data showing that that's true. So weighted vests, like, have at it. Yoga, Pilates, awesome. Evidence says not very good for bone density. Great exercise, but let's be clear. Lifting weights, progressing to jump training with safety and supervision, hopefully. Awesome, but requires progression and an overload stimulus.
Yeah. And I find power training to be one of the most critical things for our elderly population, because it's the trait you're going to need when you fall or when you trip. Right. Your ability to contract the muscle. First of all, you need the strength, but then the ability to produce that force rapidly is what will allow you to catch and decelerate your body if you do trip. And we specifically work on this, but again, not day one. We build that strength base so that we can progress to power training. And it doesn't look like, to your point, Olympic lifting.
No.
And
it can be that. But it doesn't have to be that.
But it doesn't have to be that. And this is something that I've, throughout my career, even with athletes, that there was such a thing about Olympic lifting, right? The clean squat bench program. And I've never, ever bought into it, because Olympic lifting as a sport in and of itself, people try their whole lives to get good at it and don't. So why am I going to take a 7-foot basketball player who's being paid $20 million a year and try and teach them another sport with a high injury risk? When we can do other things that are actually more effective and will be more effective today versus after 6 weeks of learning how to do this thing. Like, it's a
Yeah.
very complex thing to master. So I think we can do simple things, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to look like what you think it's going to look like in your head when we say we're going to do power work.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I spoke a little bit about this before we got on the podcast here. And between us, we sort of decided is that you can make things very complicated, and there's probably a market for undoing confusion around complication. I've
Yeah,
got the solution. I've got the key.
yeah,
When and geez, it's almost sheepishly you admit it, is that actually the simple stuff done consistently is, that's majoring in the majors.
yeah,
And, weighted vest jump training with, while holding a bucket of water, that's majoring in the minors. And so,
yeah,
everybody can dream up some complex eating, lifting, paradigm that you need, and 17 different supplements, and I'm like, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, but man, it looks good. And
yeah,
like, Jeremy, like what's this program you've got where we're just like, sort of doing the same moves like regularly, and you just say, well, that's the foundation on which we build, and it can
yeah,
lead to greater complexity, but
yeah,
yeah, it's mind-boggling to see some
yeah,
of what people get up to out there for sure.
yeah. So I call that system training.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Right? It's we that this is how we the
how unoriginal,
I
how
know, I know.
unoriginal. Yeah,
Well, honestly, it's a
yeah,
funny story. That was our program. That is literally
yeah,
how we went 3.5 years with zero non-contact injuries in a high velocity collision sport. Right?
yeah,
We played around 100 games of NHL hockey a year with
yeah,
preseason,
yeah, yeah.
and essentially it boiled down to were we strong?
Right.
Right. So we lifted very, very heavy weights in the off season to build a big
Yeah,
strength base.
yeah,
And then in season, we lifted enough weight to give a little stimulus to maintain that. It was micro doses of strength work every single day. We did something. And we really took pride in doing the basics very well. And I'm trying to move away from calling them the basics because it diminishes them and makes us think we should be looking for more advanced stuff. And the funny story is, our new general manager took over, and we were 2.5 years in with no injuries, and this has never been done before in any professional sport. And I asked him, well, how do you think we're doing? Is this where you thought we'd be at this point? Because we went in and introduced an entirely new system into the NHL, and he's like, well, I just thought we'd be a little further ahead than we are. He's done what? And it was entirely based on it didn't look flashy enough.
yeah,
Right? Yeah, but you guys are just lifting weights. Well, what we're doing is manual treatments. We are measuring, we are monitoring, and we are intervening. And we
yeah,
are doing that on repeat. And training should look like that. It's not entertainment. It might
right.
be a little bit boring. But I think you've got to build and build within a program, adapt to it, and then we'll change. But it's a 6 to 8 week process for us.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the hardest part for me to hear that is that I know the team you were working with, and they're my team. So
Yeah,
it's disappointing, but I think pull it out and extend it again. So that's the microcosm of a hockey season, and now it's like decades and decades and decades. And the majoring in the majors is really consistently showing up. And I point this out all the time, and people are like, "Yeah, yeah," and you say the basics, and you're like, okay, must come up with a new word for basics because basics don't sell. But you can make it fancy. You can make it
yeah,
complicated. You can do all kinds of yes, bizarre things and make it seem as if it's somehow bespoke and
hmm,
but the truth is like doing it regularly, some consistent fundamentals, we've got data for that, and I don't suggest is that we should never change and deviate from that. everybody finds some things boring after a while. So let's try something new. But if you want the answer, like the answer that we know, what we know, not the known unknowns or the unknown unknowns, right? What we know is just not particularly sexy stuff. So, and that's hard, hard message to hear.
Yeah, I think it is. And what we tried to do, my job was innovation, right? And so we had to balance that, right? So how did we go from keep the foundations and innovate and improve? But what it wasn't was drifting away from them.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where British cycling, Dave Brailsford brought in the marginal gains principles, 1% better every day. And they were elite at the foundational elements and did these factors. Well, when Dave left British cycling, they started drifting and only doing the one percenters and stopped doing squats. And cyclists who don't do squats don't ride very fast. Right? And so they did away with that. So because they had to bring it back down to earth. And I do think that the issue we're facing now, I saw an article on Fit Insider the other day to say that the boom in the wellness industry hasn't led to an impact on health factors. Obesity continues to rise and all the rest of it. Because we've created a venture capital driven industry out of it. And what that means is profit.
Yes.
And what is profitable is not lifting barbells. Right? What is profitable is come in, I'll test your blood and sell you 100 different supplements. One company literally, I know a gentleman who went and got his blood tested and he has to take 50 supplements a day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything.
No.
Anything that's happening to you like that, you go sit and you get an IV, you go sit in a red light therapy bed, you go sit in a cold plunge, right? It's very profitable. I'm
trying not to laugh, but it's an interesting conversation to have because I know in pro sports, because not just yourself, but I'm fortunate. I don't work in pro sports, but I have enough friends, and every now and again we get together and we'll talk. We find ourselves at a conference and we'll have a coffee or a glass of wine or something, and I'm like, give me the most bizarre thing, and they go, somebody sent me a letter and they were trying to sell us, and I won't say, but X. And they said that this, and I'm like, what? And they go, and it was like $8,000 an athlete repeated 3 times. And I was like, pardon me. And as you say, like the, blood testing, and that's just scraping the surface. So, translate or percolate that down to forget about the, if you're ice hockey, 20 to 30 players you might handle with the top team and the junior team below them, to football where you've got more, and the NBA where you've got less, and now spread it out across the general population. And this is where the wellness industry is at, is that you need new innovation because old is boring, old does nothing, when actually old, I hate to say boring, but old basic stuff works. And all the rest of this stuff, there's no evidence. It probably, for the most part, doesn't work because it's overly complex. And, talk about, measuring in the minors or marginal gains, as you say. Marginal gains are fine as long as you have the foundation.
You've got to have the big gains as well.
You start out here and it's like, okay, we're going to give you like a total body scan and we're going to answer this. And they go, oh, you've got this, thing. And then on further investigation, sorry, you didn't. And that was wrong. Yeah. Apologies for that.
Oh, and it didn't do anything,
So body scans, red light therapy, cold plunges, vitamin infusions, vesicle treatments, all, it can go on forever.
Yeah. And so like these are the things that for consumers, that's why we wanted to do this podcast in the first place, is because there is just so much noise out there with all of this stuff. And I just want to touch real quick back on osteoporosis.
Yes.
Because this is a huge thing that we're seeing. And again, men and women,
Yeah.
What you mentioned that the weight vest
Yeah.
phenomenon, we'll say, it's a lie, right?
It is
Right.
0.0 data.
Yeah. And so what is the process? Like, how do we or can we reverse osteoporosis, and how do we avoid it in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. Osteoporosis is a chronic disease, like a lot of other chronic diseases. The best predictor of it is have a family history. So if your mom, dad, and men get it too. I know the belief, at least, is it's a women's disease, but it's probably about 1 in 4 women have some type of osteoporotic progression, whether it leads to a fracture or not,
Mhm.
and probably about 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 men. So if mom had it, or dad, or mom and dad had it, or your aunt, uncle, that's one of the big predictors. If you're a smoker, you're at greater risk. If you consume higher alcohol, you're at greater risk. If you are not exposed to sunlight regularly, particularly early in life, because this is, and I know everybody goes, "Oh, sunlight's bad for skin cancer," and I'm like, I absolutely agree. And this is where the yin and yang of the messaging goes
Yeah.
along, because still your best source of vitamin D is being in the sunshine. But of course, we put SPF 30, 50 on kids, and we cover them up, and we did that with my kids because of skin
Yeah.
cancer, and I have 2 redheaded boys, right? So
Yeah.
and yet at the same time it's like, but they need a little bit of extra sunshine to get their vitamin D. And so, but yes, you can take vitamin D. Low
Hmm. Hmm.
calcium, because we peak in terms of our bone mass, and I hate to say this, probably our muscle mass too, at around age 30.
Right.
So build it up, and that's the bank. And then after that, you're sort of, hopefully you're kind of holding constant, and you're not sort of like most people, you're sort of on the downslope. Now, men and women, but particularly women, hang on to that bone mass usually until around when perimenopause begins. And then the
Yeah.
loss of estrogen, their bone mass begins to decline. Can you reverse that? Reversal is hard. It's like talking about reversing muscle mass loss, and the difference is, the answer quickly is probably no. But the difference is, there's this type of decline, there's a slight downward trend, and there's this,
Yeah.
right? So, and I
Yeah.
always point out to people that a small 1 to 2 degree change in course here, as the lines begin to diverge as you get
Yeah.
older, this person is hitting some sort of threshold of muscle or bone, and their risk for fracture or their risk for mobility issues is
Hmm.
way higher. And this person who's and is like this, they hit that threshold in their 90s. And you know everybody goes, longevity is awesome, and I'm like, it is. And who doesn't want to live, quote unquote, forever?
Right.
But I have no interest in living to be 120 and feeling like I'm 120.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'll take 95 good innings, and
Yeah.
just compress morbidity, and 12, 6, whatever months of not feeling great, and then I'm gone, and that's the end of
Yeah.
my story. Or you can live until 95 and be sick, from the age of 75 onwards, and live the last 25 years with bone fragility. You fractured a bone. Hopefully you recovered, because that's tough, particularly after a hip fracture.
Yeah.
But you can't move. You're pushed around in a wheelchair, and all of these things. And like, I don't want to like, I'm not there, so I can't project myself forward and say I won't feel like it's great to be alive. But I think when we ask those people and we get them to
Mhm.
rate it subjectively, the quality of their life is not great. And that's the matching of lifespan and health span. And
Yeah.
I think when people talk lifespan, what most of us really want is health span.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. Wouldn't we all love to live, but 120 and feeling 120, and being dependent and everything. I don't know. I don't know where that I'm there right now anyway.
Yeah. And that's why we chose Vitality Collective and not Longevity Collective.
Great
Because
wording.
yeah, view it as, if we do everything we can to promote vitality throughout lifespan, we'll get longevity,
Yes.
right? Because we'll just be healthier and we'll
Yep.
have less chance of falling, less chance of a major injury, less downtime from surgeries, less chronic disease. Because ultimately, as we lose that function, that's what leaves us susceptible to chronic disease. Right? If
Yeah.
we stop moving, cognitive decline accelerates, our
Oh,
metabolic
yeah.
health accelerates, bone density, all of these things, it becomes a faster and faster decline if we stop doing the things we love. Not to mention, if I'm a tennis player and I can no longer play because of my shoulder, now I'm
Yeah.
out of my social circle.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
this compounding impact where if we can keep you doing that stuff, and we treat life like a sport, we train you for these goals, and we avoid injury, we will get longevity, but it'll be
Yeah.
great. It won't be in that like my grandmother. I swear, she was, from the age of 30, she was 90.
Yeah.
you know, she was, as long as I knew her, as long as I could comprehend, she was too old to do something.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 And it's interesting, unfortunately, my dad passed away in the pandemic. He was 84 at the time. My
Mm,
mom is now 86. She lives in an assisted care facility. She's still pretty able. She gets around. Her mobility is not great, but when you talk to her and her friends that are there, there's a romanticization of the notion that everybody's good and then they literally, they just went to sleep, they didn't wake up,
yeah,
that is the way everybody wants to go. But they want it right to the end, and they just want
yeah,
to fall off a cliff. And I'd like to say that's how everybody goes, but there's a lot more people who are, it's the slow decline into sort of this
yeah,
not so great state, tremendous reliance on others. Maybe dementia creeps in, and I understand dementia is, obviously genetic risk and everything else like that, but we don't have great drugs for it. So I need to say this, is that there are probably about, a dirty dozen, half dozen, really simple, here we go again,
yeah.
basic things that you can
Right.
do. Being physically active is one, eating a good diet, maintaining a
Yeah,
good social circle, social in the traditional sense, not
yeah.
social online, like actually interacting with people,
Right.
that greatly reduce your risk. And,
Right.
and we don't have a drug for it. So, man, let's do everything we can to push back against that. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and what I've found more and more, and it sort of goes back to the injury risk in sport, but what I've found is that the genetics set the baseline risk,
yeah,
but largely the expression of the disease or the condition, it comes down to so many lifestyle factors.
absolutely.
I had no idea until I really started getting into this longevity space and looking at dementia, how much of that was caused by occlusion of the blood flow to the brain. Huge driver of dementia. You
Yeah.
think about the micro vessels in your brain versus the big arterial vessels. So we do our coronary calcium score. You're at 100, not bad. Well, if you're 100 here, what are you here? Right?
Hmm.
It's one system. And so as we lose blood flow, so taking care of all of this stuff through movement, through activity, there is so much of our health span, our vitality, that really is under our control. We can't just say, okay, well, we're susceptible to it. It's our genetics. It's going to happen. A lot of that genetic risk I'm finding is inherited behaviors. Your
Yeah.
parents are obese. Maybe you've got some genetic factors, but you also learned how to eat from them,
Yeah.
right? And you perpetuate these behaviors that lead to the conditions that your family have generally suffered from. And so I think if we can intervene early, we can just we can get so much out of um, out of our genetics. We can change so much by monitoring our lifestyle.
Absolutely. No, you're preaching to the converted, of course. I mean, I think I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I love what I do. It's an honor and a privilege to do what I do. I've been motivated by lots of things in my career. Early on, it was about me, I'll be frank.
Hmm.
Later on, and now more lately, it's been a lot about the people that I work with and mentor. But it's also now driven by a passion to try and translate information. And so thank you for the
Yeah.
platform to be able to talk about it, but also to just give people truthful responses. And
Hmm.
so you said about filtering out the signal from the noise, because the ratio of noise to signal now is massive, and the advent of biohacking and
Hmm.
microdosing this and microdosing that, and I'm like, so what's the evidence for that? Show me the data. They go, oh, I don't have data, but who can wait for the clinical trial? And I'm like,
Right.
well, but do we even know it works? They go, well, but there's lots of, and I'm like, so we don't know. Just
Right.
say we don't know, but we think it might. And I said, or it could be bad. And they go, well, why would it be bad? And I'm like, because we don't know
Because we don't
what
know.
the answer is, right? And
Right.
you know, so that's an unknown, and
Hmm.
you're banking on that. So, uh,
Yeah.
I think that it's so congratulations on the Vitality Collective and not the Basics Connect Collective, because I don't know that would sell. So, but
Yeah.
I think the message is it may be a hard one for people to swallow, but it's the one that when you come from McMaster University, the home of evidence-based medicine, as we like to say,
Yeah.
you really could only talk in an evidence-based manner if you stick to data, science, and whatever you want to call that. But I just call it truth.
Yeah. And what a great place to start wrapping up, Stuart. I'm respectful of your time. I'd love for people to have three takeaways. We do this on every show.
Mm.
Three takeaways that people can go away and implement today to optimize their muscle mass, body composition, bone health, um, in this very confusing world.
Yeah. So number one, if you're not doing something that is going to improve your strength, weightlifting, strength training, resistance training, whatever you want to call it, then it's time to start. It doesn't need to be fancy. Start slow, start low, build up as you progress. That's number one. Number two, it's a future investment. So I had the pleasure and privilege of doing a seminar with two sort of Canadian icons that are, their names are Hal and Joanne, and they do these body break things on TV. And everybody, it's a little bit like if you're in the UK, like Joe Wicks, the sort of that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
character. There's kind of everywhere. But these two, they've been doing it before it was cool. And Hal's expression, his name's Hal Johnson, and he said, I try and think about a vision of my future me. And I was like, wow, that's like, this was a few years ago. And I was like, that never really thought about that. He goes, yeah, I try to think what I want to be like 5, 10 years from now in a physical sense. An exercise that I just talked about in number one is like compound interest. The investment in when you're 50, 55, 60, 65 for when you're 70, 75, 80, it just keeps adding up. And it's
yeah.
not that the benefit keeps adding up, but the curve becomes this instead of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's number two. Think about the investment in the future you. And number three is really back to our dietary stuff, because it's real broad stroke stuff, man. Like eat some food, like eat some real food, and hopefully eat it with some friends, because I think as we, I don't think either of us is an expert in sort of social interaction, but the pandemic for me shone a big light on what it means for older people to lose contact with other people, their
Hmm.
friends, their relatives, and those sorts of things, and to watch the declines that we saw. It was just, the pandemic was an experiment in accelerating aging for older
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
I think from a physical activity standpoint, definitely, obviously from a disease standpoint, but from a social circle standpoint. And
Hmm.
I don't read in that area. I don't know enough in that area, but I have enough friends that give some really great talks, and I've read a few books enough to realize the power of sort of human connections. And so,
Yeah.
cherish your friends, cherish your time with your family, your religious faith, whatever it is that brings you together, because I think that's a really big deal.
Wow. So I can't emphasize those points enough. The starting at any age. We've had people start lifting weights at 70, and actually people who've done quite a lot of training at 70 come and start working with us, who have had 50-70% improvements in strength, right? In the quad, the grip, all these important areas for longevity, right? And so you can improve at any stage of life, and that will be the investment in your future, right?
Absolutely.
You have given yourself 10 quality years by improving your function today. I absolutely love that. And so where can people learn more from you? Where can people find you online or in person?
So I am MacKin Prof, McMaster Kinesiology Professor. That's MacKinProf on X, Instagram, and I hate to say this, TikTok, but I'm on there really to just grade at my young son, who told me that old people shouldn't be on TikTok. So I don't do a lot of things.
How many dances do you have on your site on TikTok?
I'm useless at TikTok. The platform confuses me. I also find the messaging absolutely abominable, terrible. I'll just say terrible. I spend most of my time on Instagram these days. Twitter or X tends to drive me bananas, but I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can find me at Stuart Phillips, and I'm on Facebook as well as smp.phd.
Brilliant. Well, Stu, thank you so much for your time today and this wealth of knowledge. Yeah, people are going to get so much from it.
You're most welcome.
All right. Thank you. What a great conversation with Dr. Stuart Phillips on the power of muscle for lifelong health. Here are the 3 key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, muscle is your metabolic ally. It supports mobility, blood sugar regulation, and metabolic health. Number 2, strength training is essential. It's never too late to start, and progression over time leads to remarkable results. Number 3, nutrition and connection go hand in hand. Prioritize protein and enjoy meals with the people that you love. If today's discussion resonated with you and you're looking for ways to integrate early detection, personalized health strategies, and strength-based longevity into your own life, we'd love to help. At Vitality Collective, we've built these principles into a comprehensive system designed to optimize health and performance at any stage of life. If you're ready to take action and see how this approach could work for you, visit www.vitality-collective.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.